Discover the quiet power behind never chase, never text, never explain. Watch what happens next. Stoic breath, and learn how silence, restraint, and self-mastery can transform your mindset and relationships. This video reveals how letting go of validation and choosing composure builds true confidence and inner strength. Start reclaiming your energy, sharpen your clarity, and move through life with calm authority. Subscribe now to Stoic Breath for more powerful insights delivered daily. In a world that seems obsessed with being noticed, being heard, and being validated, so many people spend their lives trying to explain themselves, prove their worth, and chase attention that never truly fills the emptiness they feel inside. But the quiet ones, the ones who resist the urge to beg, to justify, to chase, often carry a kind of power that most people never understand. Stoicism teaches us something simple, but profound. True strength is not found in noise. It is found in restraint. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is clarity. It is self-respect. It is control over what actually matters when emotions rise and every instinct tells you to react. And that is where peace begins, not in immediately answering, not in defending yourself, not in saying more, but in choosing restraint. Every word you choose not to say, every pause you choose on purpose, protects your dignity and shields your mind from unnecessary chaos. In those quiet spaces, something powerful starts to happen. Insight rises. Patterns reveal themselves. Power returns. Not because you forced the world to finally see you, but because you stopped handing your power away in the first place. Most people live in a constant state of reaction. They chase approval, defend their worth, and explain themselves to people who are never really listening. And with every extra word, every emotional message, every attempt to be understood, they often give away another piece of their energy. The truth is, silence, restraint, and measured action carry more weight than 1,000 arguments ever could. Real control is not built through noise. It is built through composure, through clarity, and through the quiet confidence of knowing your value does not depend on someone else agreeing with it. Have you ever noticed what happens the moment you stop chasing? The moment you stop texting, stop explaining, stop trying to convince people who already decided what they want to believe? Something shifts. People begin to wonder. They begin to notice. Silence is not just the absence of words. It becomes a mirror. It reflects what you value, what you refuse to compromise, and what others often fail to recognize until it is no longer available to them. Think about how often people drain themselves trying to be understood. Long explanations, careful arguments, emotional messages sent late at night, hoping this time someone will finally understand their heart. But every time you do that, a little of your power leaves with it. Silence takes that power back. In the quiet, your energy begins to gather again. What was once scattered trying to be seen, approved of, or validated starts to settle. And when it settles, you begin to see more clearly. You start noticing how people behave when you no longer react instantly, when your attention is no longer available whenever they demand it. Your absence starts saying something your words never could. And then something even deeper happens. When you stop performing for recognition, your presence changes. It becomes heavier, calmer, more deliberate. People feel it, not because you announced it, but because you did not. The mind changes too in that silence. When it is no longer trapped in endless reaction, thoughts begin to organize. Emotions begin to settle. Perspective begins to return. As Epictetus said, it is not what happens to you that matters most, but how you react to it. Silence creates that distance. It keeps the chaos outside from invading your judgment inside. It gives you space to observe instead of instantly obeying every emotional impulse. And once you begin observing, hidden patterns start to surface. You start seeing where your energy was wasted, where your explanations were given to people who never intended to understand, and where your hunger to be acknowledged slowly replaced your ability to simply watch, learn, and discern. Stillness reveals the cost of overextending yourself. Effort given without reciprocity drains your vitality. But every deliberate pause restores it. Every unspoken word becomes a boundary. Every moment of restraint becomes a signal that your energy is no longer open for negotiation. Over time, that restraint sharpens your perception. You begin to notice where you have been investing too much in other people's expectations, where you have been bending too far, speaking too much, giving too freely to spaces that never truly honored you. And then, quietly, insight arrives. Not forced. Not argued into existence. Not chased. Just seen. Because the moment you stop trying to control how others see you, something remarkable happens. You begin to see them clearly. Their intentions. Their consistency. Their character. Carl Jung once said that one of the most terrifying things is to accept oneself completely. And often, silence is what brings you to that confrontation. It removes the distractions. It removes the performance. And in that stillness, you come face to face not only with other people's truth, but with your own. There is a moment that only silence can create. A moment where the noise fades, the distractions fall away, and you are left alone with something most people spend their entire lives avoiding: yourself. And in that quiet, something uncomfortable but deeply necessary begins to surface. You start to see your own motives more clearly. You notice your fears, your patterns, the subtle ways you've been reacting, chasing, explaining, trying to be understood. And while that confrontation may feel unsettling at first, it is also where something powerful is rebuilt, something many people lose without even realizing it: self-trust. Because when you stop chasing approval, when you stop explaining yourself to be accepted, you begin to trust your own judgment again. You begin to move differently through the world. You no longer feel the need to argue for your value or constantly justify your intentions. You stop trying to convince people who benefit from misunderstanding you. And here is the surprising part: those who truly matter never needed your explanation in the first place. They understand without effort. They recognize alignment without persuasion. The people who only felt comfortable when you were over-explaining, over-giving, over-proving, they begin to fade. And that is not a loss. That is clarity. As Marcus Aurelius once reflected, the things we think we need from others, recognition, approval, constant understanding, are often the very things that quietly take away our freedom. And the moment you stop chasing them, something shifts inside you. A different kind of freedom appears. A grounded, steady kind of freedom where your decisions are no longer shaped by how they will be perceived, but by whether they align with who you truly are. This is where silence becomes more than just the absence of words. It becomes a tool, a discipline, a filter. Because when you are no longer reacting instantly, when you are no longer rushing to correct every misunderstanding or defend every opinion, your awareness sharpens. You begin to observe instead of react. You watch instead of interrupt. And behavior, unlike words, rarely hides for long. The quiet reveals what noise conceals. Think about how much energy is spent in mental arguments that never actually happen. Replaying conversations, imagining responses, crafting the perfect explanation that will finally make someone understand. And yet, none of it changes anything. Silence interrupts that cycle. It stops the endless inner dialogue. It cuts through the imagined scenarios that drain your energy without producing any real outcome. And in the space that silence creates, something far more valuable appears: clarity. And with clarity comes discipline. The discipline to stay composed when someone provokes you. The discipline to walk away from conversations that require you to defend your dignity just to be heard. The discipline to let people misunderstand you rather than sacrificing your peace trying to correct them. This is not weakness. This is authority. It is a quiet but undeniable signal that your attention is valuable, your energy is intentional, and your identity is not something that needs to be negotiated with every opinion you encounter. On Stoicism Breath, this is the kind of inner strength we build step by step. Not through loud declarations, but through consistent, quiet practice. Because silence does something else that most people overlook: it deepens patience. When you stop reacting immediately, when you allow situations to unfold without interference, you begin to see more. Patterns in behavior, both yours and others, become clearer. You start to understand not just what is happening, but why it is happening. And as observation replaces reaction, self-mastery begins to take root. Every time you choose not to explain unnecessarily, every time you resist the urge to chase validation, you reinforce a new pattern. A pattern of intentionality. Your actions become more deliberate, more aligned, less driven by impulse, and more guided by clarity. And the subtle influence of that restraint is powerful. It communicates integrity, boundaries, and self-respect far more effectively than any explanation ever could. The energy you once scattered trying to be understood begins to gather again. And that preserved energy strengthens your mind. It makes you less reactive, less vulnerable to manipulation, less pulled into unnecessary emotional turbulence. Over time, this creates something incredibly valuable: a quiet authority over your own experience. You begin to respond instead of react. You begin to choose instead of chase. And from that place, your decisions change. They become clearer, more grounded. You no longer act out of urgency or fear, but from a place of alignment. You consider consequences instead of reacting impulsively. You focus your attention where it actually matters, rather than where it is demanded. This is the power of observation without reaction. It sharpens your ability to discern relationships. You begin to see people as they truly are, not as they present themselves through words, but through consistent action. Those who align with your values will show it naturally. They will not require explanation or persuasion. And those who do not will reveal themselves just as clearly, often through inconsistency, absence, or behavior that no longer matches your standards. And something else happens quietly in the background. The emotional turbulence that once felt overwhelming begins to settle, because your mind is no longer reacting to every stimulus. It is observing, processing, understanding. As Plato once said, the first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself. And every pause, every withheld word, every moment you choose not to chase, not to explain, not to react, that is a small victory. A practice of that mastery. Over time, these small moments compound. They build a kind of inner strength that cannot be shaken by misunderstanding, rejection, or external judgment. Because your sense of self is no longer tied to how others perceive you. It is rooted in something much deeper: your principles, your clarity, your ability to remain steady when everything around you is not. And that is what silence truly gives you. Not emptiness, not absence, but power. A quiet, steady, unshakable power that grows every time you choose restraint over reaction, clarity over noise, and self-trust over external validation. There comes a point where something subtle but powerful begins to shift within you. It does not arrive with noise or dramatic change. It happens quietly, almost unnoticed at first. The more you practice restraint, the more your insight deepens. And suddenly, you begin to see a difference you could not clearly recognize before, the difference between perception and reality. On Stoicism Breath, this is where transformation truly begins. Because most people do not suffer from reality itself, they suffer from how they interpret it. They react to assumptions, to imagined intentions, to stories their minds create about what others think or feel. But when you step back, when you choose silence instead of immediate reaction, something changes. You begin to notice patterns. You begin to see how influence works, how people communicate not just through words, but through behavior, timing, and consistency. Interactions that once felt confusing or emotionally overwhelming now start to make sense. Not because people have changed, but because your perspective has. You are no longer reacting blindly. You are observing deliberately. And in that shift, your focus naturally moves toward what is actually within your control, instead of being consumed by what is not. This is a powerful turning point. Because once your attention returns to what you can control, your thoughts, your responses, your energy, your judgment begins to sharpen. You stop wasting mental energy trying to predict or manage other people's perceptions. Instead, you start making decisions rooted in clarity. And over time, this builds not just awareness, but a kind of strategic thinking that most people never develop. Through consistent practice, something even more interesting happens. You begin to understand the balance between presence and absence. You start to see that sometimes your silence carries more weight than your words ever could. That your absence from unnecessary conflict, your refusal to engage in meaningless arguments, becomes a form of influence. Not forced, not aggressive, but undeniable. Your energy begins to flow differently. Instead of being scattered across reactions, explanations, and emotional responses, it becomes focused, deliberate, intentional. You conserve your attention, and because of that, your decisions carry more weight. They are no longer rushed. They are no longer driven by urgency or emotion. They are guided by principle. And this is where silence reveals its deeper power. It communicates strength without confrontation. It shows confidence without needing validation. Every moment you choose restraint becomes both a shield and a lesson. A shield that protects your peace. A lesson that reminds you that mastery is not found in how loudly you respond, but in how intentionally you choose not to. Over time, something begins to fade. The impulse to explain yourself. The need to defend every decision. The urge to chase attention or approval. These habits, once automatic, begin to lose their grip. And in their place, something stronger grows, self-trust. In the stillness, your mind becomes clearer. Imagination no longer distorts your understanding. You no longer assume the worst or create unnecessary narratives. Instead, you begin to see reality as it is, not as your fears project it to be. And because of that, your emotional responses become more intentional. You are no longer reacting out of habit. You are choosing your responses with awareness. This shift changes everything. Your energy is preserved instead of wasted. Your decisions reflect alignment instead of impulse. Your mind becomes steady, your judgment more precise. And gradually, silence becomes more than just a practice. It becomes a way of being. Every unspoken word now carries meaning. Every pause becomes an act of discipline. Every moment of restraint builds clarity, self-respect, and discernment. You are no longer reacting to life. You are engaging with it consciously, navigating interactions with calm precision. And this quiet is not passive. It is active. It protects you. It reveals truth. It allows you to see what others miss. It forms the foundation of a presence that is not loud, but deeply influential. A presence that people feel, even when nothing is said. In this cultivated quiet, your energy becomes measured, purposeful. You no longer give your attention freely to everything that demands it. Instead, you choose where it goes. And because of that, each interaction becomes clearer, more intentional, more aligned. Silence also creates space for self-knowledge. Without constant reaction, without the need to perform or explain, you begin to understand yourself better. Your values become clearer. Your boundaries stronger. Your decisions more consistent. And this alignment between who you are and how you act becomes visible, not through words, but through presence. What once felt like ordinary moments, conversations, disagreements, decisions, now become opportunities to practice something deeper. Resilience, discipline, awareness. Each pause reinforces your ability to remain steady. Each moment of restraint strengthens your internal foundation. And over time, you begin to realize something important. True power is rarely loud. It is not reactive. It does not demand attention. It is deliberate, measured, internal. By choosing restraint over reaction, observation over impulse, patience over compulsion, you begin to build a presence that speaks without speaking. A presence rooted in integrity, in clarity, in control. And the more you practice this, the stronger it becomes. Your self-mastery deepens. Your influence grows, not because you are trying to control others, but because you are fully in control of yourself. And that is something that cannot be taken away by misunderstanding, judgment, or external noise. In this intentional quiet, understanding naturally emerges. Your energy is no longer drained. Your actions are guided by principle, not necessity. Your mind becomes sharper, your emotions more balanced, and every moment of silence reinforces your autonomy. Because silence, when practiced with intention, is not the absence of strength. It is the embodiment of it. It is clarity. It is discipline. It is presence. And in that quiet, you begin to hear truths that were always there, but were impossible to recognize when your life was filled with noise. There is a quiet shift that happens the moment you stop reacting impulsively. It may not feel good. It may not feel like a breakthrough. But something important begins to unfold. When you look back, when you choose not to respond immediately, your mind finally feels something that's been missing for a long time. Faith. On Stoicism Breath, this is where clarity begins. Because most people are not overwhelmed by life itself, they are overwhelmed by their reaction to it. They respond too quickly, too emotionally, too automatically. And in doing so, they never give themselves the opportunity to actually see what is happening. But when you pause, when you resist that immediate urge to react, you create a gap. And inside that gap, awareness starts to grow. As Epictetus once said, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not caused by the thing itself, but by your interpretation of it. And the most powerful part of that idea is this: you can change that interpretation at any moment. That means your suffering is not fixed. It is not permanent. It is not outside your control. It is something you can influence the moment you step back and observe instead of react. In those moments of silence, something remarkable begins to happen. Clarity rises. You begin to separate what truly matters from what only feels urgent. The noise starts to fade, and your energy, once scattered across countless reactions and emotional responses, begins to return to you. It realigns with purpose. Patterns that were once invisible slowly become clear. You begin to notice repetition in your interactions. The same behaviors, the same dynamics, the same emotional triggers. And with that awareness, something deeper emerges. You start to understand the motivations behind people's actions. Not what they say, but what they consistently do. And this realization can be both freeing and uncomfortable, because you begin to see where your effort has been misplaced, where you have invested energy into people or situations that did not return it, where you have tried to explain, to fix, to prove, to be understood, and received little in return. But every pause becomes an opportunity to take that energy back, an opportunity to reclaim the power you unknowingly gave away in the pursuit of approval or understanding. Observation begins to replace compulsion. Your actions no longer come from urgency. They come from intention. And when that happens, your decisions start to feel different. They feel deliberate, grounded, thoughtful. You are no longer reacting to every emotional wave. You are choosing your direction with clarity. Stillness also gives you something else, a chance to reflect, not just on what is happening now, but on what has happened before. You begin to see how your past behaviors were shaped by attachment, by expectation, by the desire to be seen, heard, and validated. You notice how often those desires influenced your decisions, and how, over time, they may have weakened your inner strength. But here is the turning point. When you begin to understand that your self-worth is not dependent on recognition from others, everything changes. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself endlessly. You no longer feel compelled to argue, justify, or defend every choice you make. Clarity brings emotional refinement. The urge to react begins to fade. The need to prove begins to dissolve. And in its place, something stronger emerges, a calm, steady awareness of what truly matters and what does not. Carl Jung once said that true enlightenment does not come from imagining light, but from becoming aware of the darkness within. And silence is what allows that awareness. Without constant distraction, without the noise of reaction, you are left with yourself, your thoughts, your patterns, your truths. And while that may feel uncomfortable at first, it is also where balance is found. Because in that space, you no longer rely on external validation to feel grounded. You begin to understand yourself on a deeper level. You begin to trust yourself again. Silence also cultivates patience. Instead of jumping into every situation, trying to control outcomes or correct perceptions, you begin to watch. You allow events to unfold naturally. And in doing so, you see things more clearly. Each interaction becomes an opportunity to observe, to notice patterns, to understand alignment. You are no longer forcing outcomes. You are allowing truth to reveal itself. And something interesting happens to your energy. The energy that was once spent reacting, explaining, and chasing now begins to consolidate. It becomes focused, stronger, more stable. Your presence changes. It becomes deliberate, resilient, grounded. Self-mastery deepens through this practice. Every time you choose not to react impulsively, every time you pause instead of responding, you strengthen your internal authority. Your actions become more measured. They are guided by principle, not by impulse. And this changes how others perceive you as well. Not because you are trying to influence them, but because your presence communicates something powerful: integrity, boundaries, self-respect, and it does so without a single word. Silence teaches your mind to weigh consequences instead of chasing immediate reactions. It shifts your focus from short-term emotional relief to long-term clarity. And over time, your mind begins to stabilize. Emotional turbulence fades, not because life becomes easier, but because your responses become more intentional. You regain authority over your energy. Instead of seeking validation from external sources, you redirect that energy inward, toward understanding, toward purpose, toward deliberate action. And this is where relationships become clearer than ever. You begin to see who truly aligns with your values, not through what they say, but through what they consistently do. Those who are genuine will naturally respond with alignment. They will not require effort or persuasion. And those who are not will reveal themselves just as clearly, through inconsistency, through absence, through behavior that no longer matches your standards. Over time, something powerful begins to take shape within you, not through force, not through loud declarations, but through quiet, deliberate restraint. What once felt like a struggle to hold back slowly becomes a source of strength. The impulse to defend yourself, to justify your actions, to chase validation, it starts to fade. And in its place, something far more stable begins to grow: self-trust. On Stoicism Breath, this is where real transformation becomes visible. Because when you trust yourself, you no longer feel the need to constantly prove who you are. Your decisions become clearer. Your actions align naturally with your values, not with external pressure or the opinions of others. And your mind begins to operate differently. It becomes focused, intentional, steady. Instead of reacting to everything around you, you begin to choose how you engage. Each interaction becomes meaningful, not automatic. Each response becomes deliberate, not impulsive. And what once felt like ordinary, everyday moments, conversations, disagreements, misunderstandings, start to transform into opportunities. Opportunities to practice awareness, to strengthen discipline, to build insight. Every time you choose not to explain unnecessarily, every time you pause instead of reacting, you are training your mind. You are teaching it the value of observation. You are reinforcing the idea that not everything requires your immediate response. And in doing so, you create space. Space for clarity. Space for understanding. Space for better decisions. Silence becomes that space. A place where knowledge surfaces naturally, without force. It allows you to see things as they are, not as your emotions interpret them in the heat of the moment. And through that clarity, your choices become more refined. Your judgment becomes sharper. Your internal authority becomes stronger. With continued practice, something shifts in how your energy moves. It is no longer scattered across reactions, arguments, and explanations. It becomes concentrated, directed, purposeful. You begin to notice that each interaction you enter is intentional. Each pause carries weight. Each observation adds to your understanding. And in this quiet, something important is communicated without words. Strength, self-respect, boundaries. You no longer need to explain your worth, because your presence reflects it. You no longer need to argue your position, because your composure demonstrates it. Reflection replaces reaction. And with that shift, your mind gains something invaluable: control. Not control over others, not control over outcomes, but control over what truly belongs to you: your thoughts, your responses, your energy. This is where silence reveals its true nature. It is not passive. It is not empty. It is active. It teaches. It shapes. It protects. Every word you choose not to say, every moment you choose to observe instead of react, strengthens your autonomy. It builds insight. It refines your ability to navigate life with calm precision. Your energy is no longer wasted. It is preserved. Your judgment is no longer clouded. It is sharpened. And your decisions begin to carry a different kind of weight, not driven by urgency or emotion, but guided by principle. Each moment of silence becomes intentional. Each interaction becomes thoughtful. Each observation becomes meaningful. And through this process, something deeper develops: a disciplined mind that does not react impulsively, but responds with clarity. This cultivated quiet changes how you move through the world. You are no longer pulled into every situation. You are no longer compelled to respond to every opinion. Instead, you engage selectively, deliberately, with purpose. And over time, this practice consolidates your strength. It deepens your insight. It ensures that your responses are aligned with your principles, not your impulses. Because true strength is not found in reacting quickly. It is found in responding wisely. Silence, in this way, is not the absence of action. It is a form of action itself. A deliberate choice. A disciplined response. A quiet but powerful statement of control. Through sustained restraint, your understanding deepens. Your energy is protected. Your actions become more intentional. Your emotional balance stabilizes. And every moment of stillness reinforces your independence. This is what quiet authority looks like. It is not loud. It does not demand attention. But it is undeniable. It shapes both your inner world and how others experience your presence. And then, there is another realization that begins to emerge: the need for closure. The desire to understand why someone acted a certain way, why something happened, why things did not go as expected. It feels necessary. It feels like something you must have in order to move forward. But often, chasing that closure only deepens the wound, because it places your peace in someone else's hands. It assumes that their explanation will heal what you feel. And in doing so, you surrender control over your own emotional state. But the truth is simple. If someone truly cared, their actions would have already shown it. Silence becomes the answer. Not as avoidance, but as clarity. As a decision to stop seeking validation from places that cannot provide it. Walking away without explanation becomes an act of strength. It demonstrates that your self-worth is not dependent on someone else's recognition or understanding. Each unspoken word reinforces that truth. Each moment of restraint builds dignity. You no longer feel the need to craft the perfect message or repeat yourself in hopes of being heard. Because you understand something deeper. The act of not responding often communicates more than any explanation ever could. And something interesting happens when you choose silence. Others begin to reflect. They begin to question. They begin to notice your absence in ways your presence never forced. And that impact is not loud or immediate. It is subtle, lasting, transformative. Because the power has shifted. It no longer comes from external validation. It comes from internal mastery. This practice teaches patience. It teaches discernment. It allows you to preserve your energy for what truly matters: your growth, your purpose, your relationships that are built on mutual respect and alignment. You begin to understand that closure is not something given to you. It is something you create within yourself. It is found in the decision to stop chasing, to stop begging for understanding, to stop explaining your worth. And with each silent response, with each moment of composure, your ability to act intentionally grows stronger. You no longer react out of emotion. You respond from clarity. At the same time, your awareness sharpens. You begin to notice patterns in behavior more clearly. You see who aligns with your values and who does not. Not through words, but through consistent action. And that clarity changes everything. There is a quiet realization that changes everything, and it often arrives after you have spent too much time searching for answers in places that could never give them. The truth is simple, but not always easy to accept. Seeking closure from people who are incapable of giving it only keeps you stuck. It clouds your judgment, drains your energy, and keeps you tied to something that has already shown you its limits. On Stoicism Breath, this is where a deeper level of awareness begins. Because as Seneca once said, we often suffer more in our imagination than we do in reality. We replay scenarios, we anticipate conversations, we build entire emotional experiences around things that have not even happened, or may never happen at all. And in doing so, we carry a weight that does not belong to the present moment. But silence interrupts that cycle. When you stop chasing explanations, when you stop trying to force understanding, you begin to face reality as it is. Not as you hoped it would be, not as you imagined it could be, but as it actually stands. And in that confrontation, something powerful happens. You begin to see clearly. Detachment becomes a tool, not of avoidance, but of clarity. Without the constant need to justify yourself or explain your position, you start to notice something you may have overlooked before: how energy flows in your interactions. Where it is respected, where it is ignored, where it is reciprocated, and where it is quietly taken for granted. And sometimes, the most powerful response is not a response at all. Walking away without explanation sends a message that words cannot fully express. It says that your peace is not negotiable. It says that your boundaries are not open for debate. It says that your energy will no longer be spent trying to convince someone of something they have already chosen not to understand. This kind of silence carries integrity. It preserves your mental and emotional resources. Because every attempt to correct someone's perception, every effort to influence how they see you, costs something. It takes time. It takes focus. It takes energy that could have been invested in your own growth. When you stop chasing that external resolution, something begins to stabilize within you. Your mind becomes steadier, more deliberate. You are no longer reacting immediately to misunderstanding or disappointment. Instead, you observe. You give yourself space to respond based on principle, not on fear or frustration. And in that space, resilience begins to grow. The energy that was once spent chasing closure is now redirected. It moves inward, toward reflection, toward understanding, toward purposeful action. And over time, this shift becomes self-reinforcing. Each moment you choose not to react impulsively strengthens your self-trust. Each time you hold your boundaries, they become clearer, stronger, more natural. You begin to notice a contrast that was always there, but not always visible. The difference between people who genuinely value your presence and those who only respond when you are chasing, explaining, or proving yourself. And once you see that clearly, your choices begin to change. As Marcus Aurelius once reflected, the quality of your life is shaped by the quality of your thoughts. And when you detach from the need to be understood by everyone, when you stop seeking validation from those who cannot provide it, your inner world becomes quieter, more stable, less influenced by external chaos. This is where true closure begins to take form. Not as a conversation, not as an explanation, but as a decision. A decision to stop looking outward for something that must be created within. Closure is not something someone gives you. It is something you choose. It is the decision to walk away without needing the final word. It is the decision to remain silent instead of reopening a conversation that has already shown you its outcome. It is the decision to stop chasing clarity from someone who benefits from keeping things unclear. And in that decision, something important is restored: control. Control over your emotions. Control over your energy. Control over where your attention is invested. Each act of silent detachment becomes a statement of self-worth, a statement that your peace is valuable, that your time matters, that your emotional energy is not something to be spent carelessly. And over time, this practice transforms how you see everything. Your mind no longer seeks constant validation. Your emotional state becomes more balanced, because your sense of understanding is no longer dependent on someone else's explanation. You begin to generate that understanding internally, and with that comes a deeper kind of stability. As Epictetus said, no one is truly free who has not mastered themselves. And this is what that mastery looks like in practice. Not control over others, not control over outcomes, but control over your own responses, your own boundaries, your own direction. Every time you choose silence instead of reaction, you reinforce that mastery. And even if the world does not immediately acknowledge it, even if no one applauds your restraint or recognizes your discipline, the impact is still there. It is lasting. It is internal. It is shaping the way you think, the way you act, the way you move through life. Silence becomes both your shield and your teacher. It protects your energy while revealing deeper truths. It shows you that real resolution does not come from endless conversations or perfect explanations. It comes from the decision to protect your peace and honor your boundaries. And with consistent practice, something else begins to fade: the desire for external closure. You no longer feel the same urgency to understand every situation or resolve every misunderstanding. Instead, you develop a sense of internal completeness. Your awareness of your own sovereignty grows. You begin to evaluate relationships differently, not based on how much comfort they provide, but on how well they align with your values. You stop asking, "Do they understand me?" and begin asking, "Do they respect what matters to me?" And that shift changes everything. Because when you stop chasing closure, you start living with clarity. There is a quiet shift that happens when you stop reacting, and once you notice it, you begin to see the world in a completely different way. On Stoicism Breath, this is where silence stops being a strategy and becomes a way of seeing. Because in that silence, life reveals itself more honestly. Without constant reaction, without the need to respond, defend, or explain, you begin to observe things as they truly are. Not filtered through emotion, not distorted by assumption. Just reality, clear, unedited, and undeniable. What once seemed confusing starts to make sense. What once felt hidden begins to show itself. You start to notice patterns in people's behavior, patterns that were always there, but drowned out by noise, by conversation, by your own need to engage. Now, without that interference, those patterns become visible. Words lose their power to mislead. Because when you are not reacting, you are watching. And when you are watching, you are seeing actions, not just listening to explanations. Apologies that don't match behavior begin to feel empty. Promises without consistency no longer convince you. The gap between what people say and what they do becomes impossible to ignore. Silence becomes a lens, a way to separate appearance from reality. And through that lens, something powerful emerges: clarity. You no longer need to confront everything. You no longer need to argue your point. You no longer need to prove anything. Instead, your boundaries are expressed quietly, without conflict. Your authority becomes visible, not through force, but through restraint. There is strength in that kind of presence. Every interaction becomes a moment of choice. A moment to decide what truly deserves your attention, your energy, your response. And not everything does. In fact, most things don't. And this is where self-restraint becomes more than discipline. It becomes freedom. Because every time you choose not to engage in unnecessary arguments, every time you step back instead of stepping in, you preserve your energy. You give your mind space to reflect instead of react. And in that space, something begins to grow: understanding. Emotional maturity doesn't come from reacting faster. It comes from pausing longer. It comes from allowing yourself to observe before you respond, to think before you speak, to feel without immediately acting on that feeling. And over time, this changes you. Your mind becomes calmer. Your thoughts become clearer. Your reactions become intentional. As Seneca once said, "No one is truly free who is not master of themselves." And this is what mastery looks like: not loud, not dramatic, but quiet and controlled. It is the ability to choose stillness when everything inside you wants to react. And that choice changes everything. Because when you remove immediate reaction, truth begins to surface. You begin to see people more clearly, not who they say they are, but who they consistently show themselves to be. You begin to understand situations more deeply, not through assumptions, but through observation. And most importantly, you begin to protect your own peace. Silence becomes a statement. Not a passive one, but a powerful one. A statement of self-respect. A declaration that your energy is not available for every conflict, every misunderstanding, every opinion. Your decisions become guided by principle, not emotion. And when that happens, clarity is no longer something you search for, it becomes something you live from. Because restraint creates space. And in that space, insight grows. Without the constant need to communicate, explain, or defend, you allow understanding to develop naturally. You allow alignment to reveal itself. You allow truth to emerge without forcing it. Over time, silence becomes one of your most powerful tools. Your energy is no longer scattered, it is focused. Your attention is no longer reactive, it is deliberate. Your perception sharpens because you are no longer distracted by the urge to respond. You begin to see intentions. You begin to see value. You begin to see yourself more clearly. And the world begins to speak to you, not through words, but through behavior. Because behavior never lies. Without your reactions clouding the moment, without your explanations filling the silence, people reveal who they are through what they do. And that truth becomes easier to recognize. You start to notice who respects your boundaries and who tries to push them. You see who values your presence and who only values your response. You understand who aligns with your principles and who does not. And with that understanding comes discernment. Each moment of silence strengthens it. Each withheld reaction sharpens it. Each pause becomes a lesson in awareness, in patience, in control. This is how autonomy is built, not through control of others, but through control of yourself. Because when you are no longer driven by impulse, you are guided by intention. When you are no longer reacting, you are choosing. And when you are choosing, you are free. Over time, this practice transforms your entire way of being. You become calmer, not because life is easier, but because you are steadier. You become clearer, not because situations are simpler, but because your perception is sharper. You become stronger, not because you dominate, but because you no longer need to. Every moment of silence becomes an expression of integrity. Every pause becomes a reinforcement of self-respect. Every decision to observe instead of react becomes a step toward mastery. Because true strength is not in what you say. It is in what you choose not to say. It is in the discipline to remain still. It is in the awareness to see clearly. And it is in the quiet confidence of knowing that your power does not need to be announced. It is already there, present in every deliberate choice you make. This is the practice. And through that practice, silence becomes more than just absence. It becomes clarity. It becomes protection. It becomes power. There is a powerful transition that happens when you stop explaining yourself, and once you experience it, you begin to understand what real confidence truly looks like. On Stoicism Breath, this is where confidence stops being something you try to prove, and becomes something you quietly live. Because not explaining yourself is not weakness. It is one of the highest forms of confidence. Every time you feel the urge to justify your decisions, to clarify your intentions, or to convince someone to understand you, there is a hidden risk. You begin tying your self-worth to how others perceive you. You begin measuring your value through their approval, their agreement, their recognition. But when your mind and your heart are anchored in principle, not in approval, that need starts to dissolve. You no longer feel the urgency to be understood by everyone. You no longer feel the pressure to correct every misunderstanding. You begin to realize something deeper. Not everyone needs to understand you, and not every opinion deserves your response. Marcus Aurelius once reminded us not to waste our lives worrying about what others think, unless it truly serves a meaningful purpose. And when you start living by that, something changes. You begin to embody your values quietly. And that quiet embodiment creates a kind of authority that cannot be shaken by judgment or misunderstanding. Because real confidence is not loud. It does not try to dominate a room. It does not chase validation. It moves differently. It moves with composure, with clarity, with intention. It shows itself not through words, but through consistent action and deliberate restraint. Think about how much energy people spend trying to explain themselves, rewriting messages, overanalyzing conversations, defending choices that were already aligned with their values. And yet, despite all that effort, clarity is rarely achieved. But when you choose not to explain, that energy is preserved. And that preserved energy becomes focus. It becomes presence. It becomes strength. You begin to notice something interesting. The people who are truly aligned with your values understand you without needing explanation. They recognize your intentions naturally. And those who are not aligned, they begin to fade. Not because you push them away, but because you stop chasing their approval. And in both cases, your integrity remains intact. Because when you stop justifying your decisions, you start defining your boundaries more clearly. You begin to understand what is acceptable in your life, and what is not. You stop negotiating your standards to fit someone else's expectations. And that clarity changes how you move through the world. Energy that was once spent correcting perceptions is now invested in growth, in reflection, in intentional action. Each silent decision becomes a reinforcement of autonomy. Each moment you choose not to explain strengthens your sense of self. And over time, your presence begins to communicate something powerful without saying a single word. It communicates that your value does not require translation, that your identity is not up for debate, that your direction is not influenced by external noise. But silence does more than preserve energy, it sharpens perception. When you are no longer trying to explain or persuade, you begin to observe more clearly. You start to notice how people respond to your silence. Do they respect it? Do they question it? Do they reveal more about themselves in the absence of your reaction? That subtle feedback becomes incredibly valuable. Because without your interference, behavior becomes more honest. And through that honesty, you gain insight into character, into intention, into alignment. Each withheld word becomes a lens that reveals truth in a way explanation never could. And as you continue practicing this restraint, something begins to grow inside you, internal confidence. Not the kind that needs recognition. Not the kind that depends on applause. But the kind that is built quietly through repetition. Each time you resist the urge to justify yourself, you reinforce the belief that your value exists independently of others' opinions. Your mind begins to trust itself. Your judgment becomes more stable. Your sense of self becomes grounded, no longer shaken by external noise. And this is where confidence transforms. It becomes calm. It becomes steady. It becomes unshakable. Because confidence expressed through silence does not provoke, it filters. It naturally reveals who aligns with you and who does not. Without confrontation. Without explanation. Without effort. You no longer need to argue your truth. You live it. And that changes everything. Each interaction becomes an opportunity, not to prove yourself, but to practice discernment. To decide where your energy goes. to choose what deserves your attention, to reinforce your intentional presence. And as you detach from the need to justify, patience begins to deepen. Your mind becomes steadier. Your emotions become more balanced. You are no longer reacting out of urgency. You are responding from clarity. Energy is no longer scattered trying to influence perception. It is focused on what truly matters. And as Epictetus wisely noted, nothing of true value is built instantly. Confidence is no different. It is cultivated over time, through consistent restraint, through principled silence, through choosing not to react when reaction feels easiest, through choosing not to explain when explanation feels necessary. And slowly, that practice reshapes you. You begin to carry yourself differently. You begin to think differently. You begin to respond differently. Confidence without explanation becomes visible, not through what you say, but through how you move. It communicates clarity. It communicates authority. It communicates autonomy. Because when you stop seeking recognition, you create space. Space where respect arises naturally. Space where alignment becomes visible. Space where understanding happens without force. And in that space, your mind becomes freer. Freer from the need to justify. Freer from the pressure to convince. Freer to act with intention, decisiveness, and composure. Your priorities become clearer. Your presence becomes stronger. Your awareness deepens. And perhaps most importantly, your self-respect becomes non-negotiable. Because every silent choice reinforces it. Every withheld explanation protects it. Every moment of restraint strengthens it. This is the quiet power of confidence. Not loud. Not performative. Not dependent on anyone else. But steady. Deliberate. And entirely your own. There is a moment, almost imperceptible at first, when everything begins to align. Not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because you begin to move through it differently. On Stoicism Breath, this is where quiet discipline transforms into quiet power. When you stop reacting impulsively and start acting deliberately, something fundamental shifts. Your decisions are no longer driven by the need to influence others or gain approval. They are guided by principle. And in that shift, self-respect is preserved, not occasionally, but consistently, with every choice you make. Because when your actions are rooted in principle, they no longer depend on how others respond. They no longer fluctuate with opinion, praise, or criticism. Instead, they become steady, reliable, yours. And in silence, you begin to trust something deeper, the feedback of reality itself. Not what people say, not what they promise, but what they consistently do. Those who truly value your presence begin to show it naturally, without being asked, without needing to be convinced. And those who don't, they reveal themselves just as clearly, without confrontation, without drama, without you needing to prove anything at all. This is where confidence begins to change form. It is no longer something you seek from the outside. It becomes something you generate from within, through alignment, through discipline, through the quiet consistency of living according to your values. Every decision you make, every interaction you engage in, every pause you allow instead of reacting, each one reinforces your autonomy. And over time, that autonomy becomes composure. Energy is no longer wasted trying to explain, defend, or persuade. It is preserved, focused, directed with intention. Your judgment sharpens because it is no longer clouded by emotional urgency. Your insight deepens because you are no longer distracted by noise. Silence begins to communicate for you. Not through words, but through presence. It conveys strength without force, clarity without argument, confidence without performance. And this kind of confidence does not need to be announced. It grows quietly, naturally, almost invisibly, until one day you realize it is unshakable. Because it is built on something real. It is built on the consistent practice of embodying your values without needing to explain them. And when you live this way, your mind begins to prioritize differently. Principle comes before perception. Reality takes precedence over expectation. You are no longer trying to control how you are seen. You are focused on how you live. Wisdom begins to emerge from this space. Not from arguments. Not from persuasion. But from observation. From restraint. From choosing not to engage when engagement is unnecessary. And in that choice, something powerful happens. Not explaining yourself becomes both a shield and a tool. A shield, because it protects your energy from being drained by endless attempts to correct how others see you. A tool, because it allows you to grow, to reflect, to act with intention, to engage strategically rather than react emotionally. Your actions begin to align more clearly with your values. Your energy becomes concentrated, no longer scattered across meaningless conflicts. Your discernment sharpens. You see more, understand more, and choose more wisely. Each moment of restraint strengthens your internal authority. Each decision to remain composed builds trust in your own judgment. And gradually, something stabilizes within you. Your presence. It becomes grounded, steady, unmoved by external pressure. Because when you maintain this composed silence, your mind and your heart begin to work together. There is no longer conflict between what you feel and how you act. There is alignment. Autonomy is preserved. Energy is focused. Clarity guides you. And all of this comes from a simple but powerful practice: refusing to explain yourself when explanation is not necessary. Through this, your confidence evolves. It becomes enduring. It no longer depends on validation, argument, or justification. It communicates through presence, through integrity, through restraint, through composure. Every unspoken word reinforces it. Every deliberate pause strengthens it. Every withheld explanation becomes an act of self-mastery. And this is what true confidence looks like. Quiet, deliberate, self-sustained. But silence also teaches something else, something deeper. It teaches through absence. When you walk away calmly, without anger, without dramatics, you create a space that cannot be ignored. Your absence becomes a mirror. It reflects what others may have taken for granted. It forces a kind of reflection that no argument ever could. Because when you stop reacting to provocations, you stop feeding them. The need for validation, the attempts to manipulate, the games people play, they lose their power. Not because you fought them, but because you refuse to participate. And in that refusal, you reclaim control over your own experience. Distance becomes instructive. It shows, without words, that your peace is not negotiable, that your boundaries are real, that respect is not something you demand, it is something that is revealed through alignment. And as you continue practicing this detachment, your priorities become clearer. You begin to see which relationships are worth your energy, which interactions are meaningful, which commitments align with who you are, and which are distractions pulling you away from yourself. Your absence begins to communicate what your presence once tried to explain. Without confrontation, without persuasion, without effort. And in letting go, you begin to teach without speaking. You demonstrate your principles through consistency, through calm, through restraint. And at the same time, your perception sharpens. Freed from the need to respond immediately, your mind begins to observe more deeply. You notice patterns. You see intentions. You recognize behavior for what it truly is. You begin to understand people, not through their words, but through their actions. You see who respects your boundaries. You see who tries to push them. You see who aligns with your values and who challenges them. Each moment you choose not to react becomes an exercise in self-mastery. It strengthens your judgment. It reinforces your autonomy. It preserves your emotional energy. And that preserved energy becomes clarity. It becomes focus. It becomes understanding. Because when you are no longer reacting to everything, you begin to see everything more clearly. And in that clarity, you find something most people spend their lives searching for: control over yourself. Not control over others. Not control over outcomes. But control over how you think, how you act, and how you choose. And that is where true power lives. There comes a defining moment when you realize that walking away, quietly, without explanation, is not loss, but power. On Stoicism Breath, this is where silence evolves into authority. Because when you walk away without needing to justify yourself, something shifts internally. You stop giving power to expectations. You stop measuring your worth through how others respond. Instead, you begin measuring everything through principle, through what aligns with your values, your standards, your sense of self. And that shift changes how you move through the world. Silence begins to communicate something deeper than words ever could. It signals that your decisions are guided by your own internal compass, not by the approval or disapproval of others. Each time you choose not to explain, you reinforce a quiet but powerful truth: your peace matters more than temporary validation. Think about how often people sacrifice their calm just to be understood. They argue, they explain, they try to fix perceptions that may never change. But in doing so, they give away their energy. They trade peace for approval. And yet, composure, true composure, communicates more clearly than any explanation ever could. Over time, this quiet detachment becomes something more than a reaction. It becomes a strategy, a way of being, a form of presence that is intentional and grounded. Because the world does not respond to noise. It responds to consistency. It responds to integrity. It responds to intentionality. Actions, not arguments, shape perception. And when your actions are aligned with your principles, you no longer need to defend them. They speak for themselves. As Marcus Aurelius reminded us, the quality of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. And when you choose to walk away calmly, you are choosing clarity over chaos, resilience over reaction, focus over distraction. You begin to cultivate a mind that values what truly matters. You begin to demonstrate a kind of power that is not loud, not aggressive, but measured and deliberate. Because real strength is not found in constant engagement, it is found in knowing when not to engage. Each time you choose silence over reaction, you strengthen self-respect. Each time you choose patience over impulse, you assert your autonomy. And slowly, something stabilizes within you. You maintain your dignity, not by controlling others, but by controlling yourself. You observe without interfering. You watch how people act when you are no longer trying to influence them. And in that observation, insight begins to emerge. Because when the mind is no longer consumed by the need to defend, explain, or justify, it becomes free to see clearly. Patterns reveal themselves. Intentions become visible. Alignment, or the lack of it, becomes undeniable. And all of this happens without confrontation, without force, without needing to prove anything. Detachment through silence transforms not only how you see others, but how you see yourself. Your self-knowledge deepens. Your judgment becomes sharper. Every interaction becomes an opportunity, not to react, but to understand. Not to argue, but to observe. Not to chase, but to choose. And with each choice, your sense of control strengthens. Because control is no longer about managing external situations, it is about guiding your internal state. The quiet becomes an instrument of empowerment. Each pause reinforces autonomy. Each withheld word preserves energy. Each moment of restraint builds discernment. Your mind becomes more precise. Your heart becomes steadier. Your decisions become clearer. No longer driven by emotion, but guided by principle. And in that alignment, something powerful emerges. Detachment begins to teach without speaking. It influences without forcing. It demonstrates that peace is not something given by others, but something chosen by you. Integrity becomes visible. Presence becomes meaningful. Not because you demand attention, but because you no longer seek it compulsively. In these moments of intentional silence, strength and clarity become inseparable. You are no longer pulled into every situation. You are no longer reacting to every trigger. Instead, you remain grounded, centered, unmoved by what does not align with you. Because the absence of reaction protects your inner equilibrium. It sharpens your perception. It communicates authority in a way no argument ever could. And through this practice, your energy becomes more intentional. Your attention becomes more focused. Your judgment becomes more refined. You begin to apply yourself only where it truly matters. And this is where true influence is found. Not in controlling others. Not in forcing outcomes. But in embodying autonomy, self-respect, and peace. Each time you choose to step back instead of stepping in, you affirm that your energy is valuable. Each time you remain composed in the face of provocation, you demonstrate mastery over impulse. Each time you resist the urge to explain, you reclaim a piece of yourself that would have otherwise been given away. And over time, these small choices create a profound internal shift. You stop chasing approval. You stop needing to be understood by everyone. You stop reacting to every expectation placed upon you. And in that space, something extraordinary happens. Your attention sharpens. Your self-respect deepens. Your focus becomes aligned with what truly matters. The mind, no longer scattered by the need for validation, becomes stable, clear, resilient. External events lose their power to disturb you, not because they disappear, but because you are no longer defined by them. Judgment, expectation, misunderstanding, these things no longer dictate your internal state. Because you have built something stronger. An internal structure. A quiet, unshakable foundation. And every moment of silence reinforces it. Every pause strengthens it. Every choice to remain composed builds it. You begin to see the subtle power of restraint. You notice how interactions change when you are no longer reacting impulsively. You see how clarity emerges when energy is preserved. You feel how confidence grows, not through expression, but through alignment. Because confidence is not something you declare. It is something you embody. It is the natural result of living in alignment with your values, your principles, your truth. And as Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not over external events. When you truly understand that, everything changes. Because that power is not loud. It is not aggressive. It is not reactive. It is quiet, deliberate, and completely within your control. There is a deeper strength that begins to emerge when silence is no longer accidental, but intentional. On Stoicism Breath, this is where deliberate silence transforms into something tangible, something you can feel shaping your life from the inside out. Because when you practice silence with awareness, you begin to notice its effects in every decision, every interaction, every moment of restraint. It is no longer just about what you don't say, it becomes about how you see, how you think, and how you choose. That power becomes real. It starts guiding your behavior with precision. Your actions become more intentional. Your responses become more aligned with your values. You are no longer reacting to situations, you are navigating them. Observation replaces reaction. And in that shift, discernment begins to sharpen. You start to see patterns in people's behavior more clearly, not because they suddenly change, but because you are no longer interfering with your own perception. When you stop explaining, stop justifying, stop trying to control how others see you, something remarkable happens. You begin to see them as they are, not as you hoped they would be, not as they claim to be, but as they consistently show themselves to be. And that clarity is powerful, because energy that was once wasted trying to influence perception is now redirected inward, toward reflection, toward insight, toward action guided by principle rather than urgency. Each moment of restraint strengthens that clarity. Each pause reinforces the foundation of a steady, deliberate mind. Over time, your mind becomes more resilient. Emotional turbulence begins to settle, not because challenges disappear, but because your internal state is no longer dependent on external reactions. You are no longer waiting for validation. You are no longer disturbed by misunderstanding. Instead, you remain grounded. And every time you choose not to react impulsively, you reinforce something important. True strength lies in control over yourself, not over others. This is where influence changes form. It is no longer about convincing. It is no longer about persuading. It becomes about embodying. Because when you detach through silence, your judgment becomes sharper. Every moment where words are withheld becomes an opportunity to evaluate, to observe intention, to recognize consistency, or the lack of it. Silence becomes both a lens and a shield. A lens, because it reveals authenticity. It allows you to see beyond surface-level behavior and understand what is real. A shield, because it protects your energy. It prevents unnecessary conflict. It preserves your focus for what truly matters. And with continued practice, something subtle but powerful develops. Your presence becomes strategic. You no longer feel the need to defend or clarify yourself unnecessarily. You observe. You discern. You act only when it aligns with your principles. Autonomy is preserved. Energy is concentrated. And your ability to respond from principle, rather than impulse, deepens. Each silent choice becomes a reinforcement of your internal authority. Each moment of restraint strengthens a clarity that cannot be shaken by external circumstances. Because your stability no longer depends on what others say, think, or do. It comes from within. Over time, this transforms not only how you see the world, but how you engage with it. Silence begins to communicate confidence, integrity, and resilience in ways that words never could. You become more selective with your attention. You invest your energy only where it aligns with your values. You stop engaging in conflicts that lead nowhere. And instead, you move with intention. Each moment of restraint communicates self-respect. Each pause reflects composure. Each choice not to explain demonstrates discernment. And all of this happens quietly, without announcement, without performance. By refusing to chase, justify, or explain, you allow reality to reveal itself more clearly. Every interaction becomes a measure of alignment. Every decision is made with awareness, not just of the moment, but of its consequences. You begin to respond deliberately, not react compulsively. And through that discipline, something grows, internal power. A power that is not visible in noise, but in stillness. Because your mind, no longer burdened by the need to prove itself, becomes free to observe, to think, to act with clarity. Each ignored provocation becomes a step toward a more grounded presence. Each withheld explanation strengthens your focus. Each moment of composure reinforces your alignment with principle rather than pressure. Energy is preserved. Judgment is sharpened. Focus deepens. And gradually, your internal state becomes something unshakable. A fortress. Resilient to manipulation. Unaffected by fleeting opinions. Anchored in values. This is where confidence evolves. It no longer needs to be expressed through words. It becomes visible through presence, through composure, through deliberate observation. Because when you stop trying to prove your strength, you begin to embody it. Every choice to remain silent becomes a lesson in self-mastery. Every pause becomes a reinforcement of control. Every moment of restraint aligns your mind, your heart, and your actions. And in that alignment, clarity emerges. Your attention becomes focused on what truly matters. Your energy flows where it is most meaningful. Your actions become precise, intentional, guided. Silence becomes both your shield and your teacher. It protects your peace. It reveals truth. It guides your perception. And it strengthens your ability to act with purpose. Because ultimately, the power you build through restraint transforms everything. Your presence becomes authority. Your observation becomes understanding. And your silence becomes influence. Not forced. Not loud. But undeniable. And with each intentional pause, something within you continues to grow. Composure deepens. Energy is conserved. Self-respect strengthens. You begin to navigate life, not through reaction, but through clarity and purpose. Confidence becomes internal. Resilience becomes natural. And every silent choice becomes a reflection of mastery over yourself. Because true power is not found in controlling the world. It is found in mastering your response to it. And in that mastery, you discover something profound. Silence is not the absence of care. It is care, refined, focused, and elevated into its highest form. There comes a moment when silence is no longer about holding back. It becomes an act of care. Not care directed outward, trying to fix, convince, or be understood, but care directed inward toward your own growth, your own peace, and the protection of your energy. On Stoicism Breath, this is where everything begins to shift. Because when you stop explaining yourself, something subtle yet powerful happens. You stop pouring your time, your thoughts, your emotions into spaces that were never capable of holding you in the first place. Think about that for a second. How many times have you tried to explain your intentions to someone who had already decided not to understand? How much energy has been lost trying to be seen by those who are never truly looking? And the moment you step back, the moment you detach, you break that cycle. You no longer participate in patterns that slowly drain your strength. Each decision to remain silent becomes a form of self-preservation. It shapes how you show up in the world. It protects your mind from unnecessary noise, unnecessary conflict, unnecessary emotional exhaustion. And something interesting begins to happen. Interactions start to change. Every misunderstanding, every rejection, every moment where you feel overlooked or dismissed, instead of becoming something you fight against, it becomes something you observe. A mirror. Not a reflection of chaos around you, but a reflection of the principles within you. Because silence reframes everything. Instead of reacting, you begin to interpret. Instead of defending, you begin to understand. And through that understanding, your presence gains weight. Your restraint begins to communicate something words never could: authority, integrity, and clarity. You are no longer scattered. Your energy becomes focused, directed only toward what truly aligns with your values. And every pause you choose, every moment you decide not to react, strengthens something deeper inside you. Your judgment becomes clearer. Your presence becomes steadier. Your intentions become consistent. This is where mastery begins, not in controlling others, but in aligning yourself. And as you continue practicing this kind of silence, your perception transforms, both internally and externally. You begin to witness events without being consumed by them. You observe behavior without feeling the need to immediately respond. You act not from impulse, but from principle. Imagine how different your life would feel if every decision came from clarity instead of pressure. If every response came from intention instead of emotion. That is what silence creates. It creates space. And in that space, something powerful grows: discernment. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to evaluate what truly matters. You begin to realize something freeing: your dignity does not depend on being understood. It does not depend on being acknowledged. It does not depend on being validated. It comes from within. And when that realization settles in, your energy naturally shifts. You stop investing in what drains you. You start investing in what builds you. Silence becomes a declaration of sovereignty over yourself. Your time, your attention, your emotional energy, they are no longer available to everything and everyone. They are reserved, intentional, aligned. And through this detachment, resilience begins to grow. Emotional turbulence fades, not because life becomes easier, but because your inner world becomes stronger. You are no longer shaped by expectations. You are no longer shaken by opinions. Each time you choose not to explain, not to justify, not to chase, you reinforce a powerful truth. Self-respect is not something given to you by others. It is something you practice within yourself. And over time, this practice becomes transformative. As Carl Jung once suggested, clarity does not come from imagining light, but from facing yourself in silence. And that is exactly what happens. In quiet moments, without distraction, without noise, you begin to see yourself more clearly. Your patterns, your motivations, your values. And instead of running from that awareness, you grow through it. Your mind and your heart begin to align. Your decisions become more grounded. Your presence becomes more authentic. And slowly, almost unnoticed, a quiet authority begins to form. An authority that does not depend on recognition. An authority that cannot be diminished by misunderstanding. Because it is rooted in something deeper, in consistency, in integrity, in truth. People may not always understand your silence. They may misinterpret it. They may question it. But that no longer matters. Because you are no longer acting for their approval. You are acting from your principles. And in that shift, everything becomes clearer. Energy that was once wasted trying to defend yourself is now preserved. Redirected toward growth. Toward reflection. Toward action that truly matters. Each moment of composure strengthens your internal mastery. Each pause reinforces your control. Each choice to remain silent becomes a statement, not of weakness, but of strength. And this practice begins to clarify your priorities. You start to recognize what deserves your attention and what does not. You step away from cycles that drain you. You disengage from dynamics that diminish your strength. And your mind transforms. It is no longer reactive. It becomes strategic. It observes. It evaluates. It chooses. Each withheld response becomes a quiet assertion of your values. Each moment of calm becomes a signal of your boundaries. And all of it happens without conflict, without force, without explanation. That is the power of silence. It elevates your confidence, not through words, but through presence. Because when you stop explaining, stop defending, stop chasing validation, your energy consolidates. Your presence becomes stronger, more grounded, more deliberate. You begin making decisions not based on how they will be perceived, but based on whether they align with who you are. And that is where true confidence lives. Not in noise, not in persuasion, but in quiet certainty. The world may not always understand your restraint. And that is irrelevant. Because your path is no longer shaped by external approval. It is shaped by internal clarity. As Aristotle once suggested, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And silence is the space where that knowledge is born. Where your thoughts settle. Where your values become clear. Where your direction becomes undeniable. And in that silence, you no longer feel the need to prove who you are. Because you finally know. There comes a point where silence is no longer something you practice occasionally. It becomes who you are. On Stoicism Breath, This is where self-knowledge stops being an idea and starts becoming a lived reality. Because silence creates the space where you finally begin to see yourself clearly. Not the version shaped by expectations. Not the version influenced by approval. But the real version, steady, grounded, and guided by principle. And from that clarity, something powerful emerges. A presence that commands respect without needing to ask for it. Not through loud words. Not through constant explanation. But through consistency. Through integrity that shows up again and again, even when no one is watching. Think about it. How often do people try to earn respect by speaking more, proving more, explaining more? And yet, the ones who truly hold attention are often the ones who don't need to say much at all. Because their actions speak with precision. Their silence carries weight. And their energy feels intentional. This is what happens when silence becomes a discipline. Every moment you choose not to react impulsively. Every time you resist the urge to explain yourself unnecessarily. Every time you step back instead of chasing. You are doing something far more important than winning an argument. You are building sovereignty over yourself. Each unspoken word becomes a reinforcement of autonomy. Each withheld explanation sharpens your ability to discern what truly matters. Each act of detachment deepens your insight into people, situations, and most importantly, yourself. And over time, something begins to shift internally. The mind, no longer pulled in every direction, starts to act with precision. Decisions become clearer. Thoughts become more organized. Reactions become intentional rather than automatic. At the same time, the heart begins to settle. No longer tied to external validation. No longer dependent on how others respond. It becomes steady, balanced, unshaken. And this combination, clarity of mind and steadiness of heart, creates a kind of strength that cannot be easily disturbed. Every interaction you face now becomes something different. Not a test of how others see you, but a reflection of how well you govern yourself. Each moment becomes an opportunity to demonstrate self-mastery. Not through control over others, but through control over your own responses. And in that quiet control, something becomes visible: strength, clarity, and dignity. Not declared, not announced, but felt. Because silence communicates in a way words never can. It carries intention. It carries discipline. It carries truth. And as you continue practicing this elevated form of self-care, because that's exactly what it is, peace stops being something temporary. It stops depending on circumstances. It stops being fragile. Instead, it becomes something you cultivate. Something you build moment by moment. Your energy is no longer scattered. It is preserved, protected, directed only toward what aligns with your values. Your judgment becomes sharper, because it is no longer clouded by emotional noise. Your understanding deepens, because it comes from observation rather than assumption. silence becomes both your shield and your teacher. It protects what is valuable: your time, your energy, your mental clarity. And at the same time, it reveals what is true about people, about situations, about yourself. And the most important thing it reveals is this: your sovereignty. You begin to understand that you are not at the mercy of external opinions, reactions, or expectations. You are in control of how you think, how you respond, how you move through the world. And this control is not loud. It does not need to be displayed. It is expressed quietly, through consistent action, through restraint, through awareness. And as you repeat this practice, something even deeper happens. Your mind starts to internalize it. It becomes automatic. Not reacting impulsively becomes natural. Observing before responding becomes instinctive. Choosing principle over emotion becomes your default. Every pause reinforces your autonomy. Every moment of composure strengthens your self-respect. Every decision made from clarity builds your internal power. And eventually, you reach a point where silence is no longer something you do. It is something you are. At that stage, something profound becomes clear. Caring for yourself is not about doing more. It is about protecting what matters. It is about choosing where your energy goes. It is about refusing to give yourself away to things that do not deserve you. Each moment of restraint becomes a statement. I choose clarity over chaos. I choose peace over validation. I choose principle over pressure. And even if the world does not fully understand that choice, it does not matter. Because true mastery is not measured by recognition. It is measured by consistency. By the ability to remain aligned with your values, regardless of external noise. This is the quiet power that endures. It does not fade with opinion. It does not break under misunderstanding. It remains steady, unwavering, transformative. Your silence becomes your strength. Every deliberate pause builds clarity. Every unspoken word reinforces dignity. Every moment you choose restraint over reaction strengthens your self-mastery. And as you carry this forward into your life, something remarkable happens. Your presence begins to speak for you. Even in stillness. Even in silence. It communicates confidence. It communicates control. It communicates truth. Without a single word. So carry that quiet authority with you. Let it guide your decisions. Let it shape your responses. Let it protect your peace. Because in the end, the strongest voice you will ever have is the one that no longer needs to be heard.